Hi, my name is Phil from emptyingthebucket.com. Today I want to talk to you about the top three things I got wrong when recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome, IBS, and POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia. So the first thing I got wrong was my diet. In the beginning, I ate a highly processed diet, which was full of foods which were really, really convenient, but also really bad for me. I didn't even realize the difference between processed food and unprocessed food. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but I would have thought like hummus or something like that I bought in the shop was very natural and absolutely fine. I've come to realize subsequently that that's not the case. These can actually be highly processed foods, kind of masquerading as natural foods. And often things like store-bought hummus are full of sugar, preservatives, and things you don't really want in your system when you're trying to recover from a chronic illness or, especially if you have gut complaints. Where I live in Spain now, they actually put what they call potenciador de sabor in the olives, which is basically monosodium glutamate in an olive producing nation, which I just cannot believe. But that's something I never would have checked before. I would have just eaten them sort of unquestioningly and been sort of dripping toxins really into my system at a point where I really didn't need that because I'd had gut health issues for a few years before coming down with chronic fatigue. So, I wanted to be avoiding foods like that most of the time. Perhaps not 100%, but nearly all the time. So in relation to food, the other thing I got wrong was blood sugar regulation. I was often spiking my blood sugar and then crashing without realizing it. And if you've ever heard the term hangry, you might know what I mean. It's when you feel hungry and angry at the same time. And this would often happen for me a couple of hours after eating, especially lunch in the afternoon, where my blood sugar would dip after having spiked. And I would feel absolutely terrible, inexplicable rage, perhaps. And at first, I kind of bought into that emotion and I would think, oh, I genuinely feel rage. And then I would realize, wait a second, this happened at the same time yesterday. And it doesn't make any sense because I've got no reason to be raging, like nothing's happened. And through some research, through experimentation, I did realize that spiking my blood sugar was impacting my health pretty severely and very negatively. The third thing I wanted to talk to you about in relation to food was alcohol and caffeine. So before really becoming aware of my diet and the impact it had on me, I was consuming a lot of caffeine through coffee and a lot of alcohol. Alcohol was a tricky one because I wouldn't really feel effects for about between 2 and 5 days afterwards, where I would get in an absolutely terrible mood. I mean, my mood would just tank and I wouldn't want to look anyone in the eye or be around anyone. And this is before I got ill as well. But I was still drinking when I first got chronic fatigue. Through really carefully observing my diet and keeping notes and observing the effects, I realized that I was often getting horrible crashes really about 5 days after consuming alcohol. And then with caffeine, it was generally about 5 hours afterwards in the afternoon if I had a cup of coffee in the morning. And it wasn't depression, it was anxiety. This is quite common with coffee. And this is the reason I've switched to decaf, is I noticed that, by late afternoon, I was having ruminating thoughts, worrying a lot. And then again, I realized, wait a minute, I've got nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. Something's changed. What is it? And my reaction to coffee was actually fine originally, but it sort of changed on me. So, these things can definitely change over time. So the next big mistake I made in relation to my recovery from these chronic illnesses was not really believing that the mind and body are one thing. So I might have said that I thought that they were, but I didn't truly believe it and I didn't act in accordance with that belief. So for this reason, it took me a long time to come to mind-body therapies because frankly, I just thought that wasn't very scientific and, I thought a physical problem needed a physical solution. So I tried functional medicine, anything physical which I could put in myself or do to myself, I would try. But when people recommended sort of stress reduction or nervous system health techniques, I would dismiss it and sort of think, no, I've got a serious illness to deal with here. I've got no time for that type of thing. But it wasn't until I came back to those techniques that I actually recovered. I did make significant strides with functional medicine, admittedly, but it didn't get me all the way there. And it wasn't until I discovered how to calm down my nervous system that I actually recovered. So the third big mistake I made when recovering was not keeping track of the changes I made. So I was taking sometimes 30 or 40 supplements in a day, just things sometimes which I'd read about online that helped someone, and I would just kind of take them in the dose that that person said. I didn't really have the money at that time because I wasn't able to work to see functional doctors because that was extremely expensive. I was trawling the forums and just trying anything, treating myself as a human guinea pig. But the problem with that was I wasn't even keeping track of the results. So I would introduce lots of supplements all on the same day at just whatever dose and would just see how I felt on that day. Obviously, this is not a very scientific way to approach your health and can, in fact, be detrimental. You might not need a given supplement or a given food or a given practice at a specific time. It might be doing you harm, or you might need more of it. And that can only really be ascertained if you keep track of what you do. This was really hard for me. I mean, I've got ADHD, I'm not very organized. I didn't want to keep notes every day, but eventually I started doing it and it did pay off. I think I would have got the same conclusions much quicker if I hadn't made this mistake. So I really recommend keep notes, and that's not just for supplements, that's for food and for any nervous system or mind body practices which you may implement, such as meditation. If you do meditate, take note of it. See if you feel way better the next day. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But you can only really know if you keep track of these things. So I hope this list has been useful. If you'd like to learn more about treating conditions involving chronic fatigue and gut issues, then please go over to emptyingthebucket.com, where there's a lot of free content, there's a course, and you can find out all about the world of alternative medicine. Thanks for listening.